Hope you enjoyed morning tea and the first session. I certainly enjoyed it. So welcome to Education Part 1. And we have four wonderful speakers who are covering some great topics. And to get us underway is Dr. Madeline Taylor. She's a lecturer at the School of Design at Queensland University of Technology. And she's going to talk grassroots circular economies, reducing waste and improving community wellbeing, which certainly got a kick-off in the keynotes, that's for sure. So, yeah, take it away, Madeline. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Yeah, there was definitely lots of synergies I noted with the keynotes. So, hi, I'm Madeline Taylor. I'm from Queensland University of Technology, and I'm here today to talk to you about some research that my colleagues and I have been doing into grassroots circular economies. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm on the unceded lands of the Gumbaynyaa peoples, and that this research was conducted on the unceded lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. So basically, I'm interested in sharing what these groups offer local governments for waste reduction and diversion, sustainability education, and community wellbeing, and how this digital gift economy offers a model and insights into how everyday citizens are participating in sustainable waste reduction practices. I'm firstly going to introduce gift economies. What are they? Outline our research and findings around waste diversion and how that's tied to community and individual well-being, and then how this leads into education and behaviour change. Pardon me. So to start with, what are gift economies? These were acts of gifts of acts of service of the driver, not money. There's no expectation of reciprocation. I want to stress gift economies aren't new. They've been happening for centuries and millennia. But what is new is their move to the online space, digital networks and Facebook and social media platforms that enable broader connections. We studied Buy Nothing Project, but I want to stress also that this is just one example. FreeCycle or the Good Karma Project, which is really popular in Melbourne, are other examples of these digital gift economies. The Buy Nothing Project was begun by two women in the US in 2013, and over the last decade has grown into a network of over 7,500 localised Facebook groups, which has over 6.5 million members worldwide. There's hundreds of these suburb-based groups across places across Australia, over 500, and you can see here that they're associated with particular suburbs or suburb groups. Each group ranges from a few hundred to a few thousand members, and we conservatively estimate that there's about 1 million Australians a part of a Buy Nothing household. That's a household that has at least one member as the group. And most membership comes from word of mouth. It's restricted to the local residents of the specific area, and this is usually just a few suburbs or even just one suburb. In the groups, people ask and gift things that they no longer need or want, or that they need or want. And the groups enable members to sidestep consumption of new products or to recirculate used items through their neighbourhood. So you can see here someone's giving away a lawnmower that no longer works, that was wanted by somebody else, or someone asking for a curtain rod holder that they needed to hang up some new curtains. So the items can be big or small, and all sorts of things. So this research started because I joined my local group. Another mum at school told me about it, and I found it really valuable. I loved the getting to know my community. I loved being part of something. I found it really useful for getting rid of some of the baby gear my kids had outgrown. And I found a lot of joy and value in it. But what kicked it into being a research project for me was this poll, where my admins asked people, why are they part of the group? And you can see here, there was connections to the community, that they wanted to get their stuff to have a new life. They just loved getting free stuff, that they liked helping others. So there was a range of motivations. But in the comments in this poll, people talked about how they would now give away stuff that they previously would have sold on Facebook Marketplace or Gumtree. And I thought, that's really interesting. If people are going against their own financial interests because they see such value in this membership with this group, there's something here. So we kind of started to investigate and kind of looking at these questions, observed kind of two groups in the local Brisbane area to kind of look at what kind of posts people were sharing, what people were asking for and giving, and then interviewed members from groups around Australia to talk to them about their experiences of their groups. And basically, to kind of a short answer, all sorts of stuff. Everything from kitchen goods, food, to kind of sports equipment, to chicken waistcoats. It was really varied. And then yes and yes. And I want to talk to you a bit about the yeses. But basically, in the interviews, people reported that their group membership improved their connection with local community, changed their attitudes to how they accumulate and dispose of goods, and inspired them to live more sustainably. Challenges emerged around the fit for purpose of the platform, the stigma around asking, and the complexities and time demands of group administration on the parts of the admins. And with this paper, I'm going to talk to you about the two motivations of waste reduction and community wellbeing, and then how they contribute to community education and behaviour change around waste. So effectively, a crucial motivation for people was dealing with stuff. People felt overwhelmed by stuff and didn't know how to responsibly dispose of things. They kind of mentioned that charity stores, they knew kind of were feeling overwhelmed, and they wanted to know that the item was going to get used, and they wanted to keep it local. They wanted to keep it in their local community. We found that people were doing a lot of regifting, so items would circulate through the group kind of multiple times, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And there was also really interesting resource sharing and community ownership activity. So people were creating Facebook albums of tool libraries, or kind of doing clothes swaps where a bag would kind of certain size clothes would circulate around households and people would take and add to it as they needed. Beauty boxes, sharing camping equipment, party boxes so you didn't have to buy disposable cups and plates every time you had a kids' party. All of these sorts of things were happening organically in these communities. They also talked about how they were really surprised about the kinds of objects people wanted. People said, you never know what people are looking for or what they might be able to be used. And this kind of idea of changing what people thought of as waste and that others might see value in it was a really interesting part of what we found. Kind of looking to the kind of what we understand as the domestic waste streams, red bin, yellow bin, green bin, so yellow bin, recycling bin. They talked about how they were starting to move stuff out of that recycling, knowing that they kind of wanted to, in that waste hierarchy, move stuff out of the recycling and into the reuse. You can see we don't have, though, a lovely pyramid. In the waste hierarchy, we kind of have just this bulge. So people really sit in this kind of reuse space, and moving activity higher in the chain to kind of that kind of avoid and increasing the asks is a kind of crucial part of research I think we need to explore in the future. And that's really important to be truly circular. And part of the reason was that people talked about the stigma and challenges around asking. So words, kind of when we talked to people about that, they talked about shame, obligation, burden, that they didn't want to ask because they felt awkward about it. They didn't want to be obliged to take stuff that they maybe, if it was a thing that they got offered back, they wasn't to suit their purpose, or that they kind of didn't want to be a burden on their community. People who were very happy to gift and gift and gift. So there's this kind of real kind of mental block there that we need to kind of address, or psychological challenge that we need to address. And some people talked about that as a psychological challenge themselves. So on to the kind of community wellbeing. There's extensive research that establishes that being generous and doing altruistic behaviours is excellent for individuals and communities' emotional wellbeing. There's lots of social trust that comes from these activity as well. And the connection to community is a strong part of the Buy Nothing movement ethos. As groups are restricted to local neighbourhoods, memberships form a kind of web of connections that help people feel connected into their local community. And we can see this kind of in the quotes here. And I think that this kind of positive and plus sum result in which community wellbeing and sustainability are linked contrasts with a lot of the public discourse around sustainability, that it's going to make your life harder or less fun. So I think this is a really interesting thing that's happening in that space. And this sense of solidarity and belonging is also really crucial to the education, as I'm going to tell you now. So our research found that it's the embedded and comfortable ordinariness in the day-to-day lives of participants via Facebook that's the group's strength in enabling widespread and long-lasting behaviour change in terms of consumption and waste disposal patterns. So there's a lot of group norming that occurs through this belonging. This idea that if you're part of a group, you identify as part of the group, and the exposure to people's behaviours in that group shifts your own values and behaviours. And while people might have, a different motivation for when they join, they just might like the idea of the free stuff, those other kind of values of sustainability or community wellbeing become increasingly important to them as the longer that they are a member. And kind of people talked about that, that kind of through the exposure, they started to shift their attitudes and their behaviours. It also shifted people's attitudes to how they accumulate and dispose of goods, inspiring them to live more sustainably, because they could see how others were kind of reusing or recycling or repurposing items that kind of gave them ideas about how they could do that for their own lives and houses. Effectively, the exposure over time, because it's people's Facebook feed, they see it when they go on to have a quick scroll. They are encouraged to kind of engage with the group because of that. And it's also because it's people like them, people that they know and that they kind of connect with on and offline. Facebook, you have to use your real name. And it has the photo as well. So you kind of see people from daycare, from local sports clubs, kind of that you know through the community, your neighbours, as well as kind of other people who you might have engaged with on the group. You'll have repeat interactions. So people did stuff like, after the third bag of my kids' clothes go into that whole household, I'll just bring that clothes down to you kind of every season, and I'll know that you'll use them. So there's this kind of relationship building that occurs because of that. And there's a sense of belonging because you're part of the group, you're selected to be part of the group, and you're kind of engaging with that. There's that sense of the belonging that comes from that that's also tied to this kind of really local idea of the neighbourhood. All of this combines to some really interesting kind of behaviour change and value change. Also, some people talk explicitly about how they use the group to educate others. And this was both members and the group admins. And they use this group to do education activity. So, for example, talking about composting, they kind of ran composting workshops and offered to kind of, as a service, offered to kind of have people come over to their house to learn about composting. Others talked about how, kind of an admin down in Victoria talked about how they use the group to educate people in the neighbourhood about the recycling bin, because in Victoria there's a non-standardised bin lids and for the recycling, so they use that as a point of interaction and engagement or education to talk to their neighbours about that. And they also kind of specifically posted stuff that might be considered waste to show that there's actually value in these objects and encourage people to value these objects as well. The other kind of part about this circular economy activity is that we kind of think to take away is that it needs to be easy. People talked about how the ease of use of these groups was a crucial part of their activity and engagement. So using the groups was prompted by the feed, by their Facebook feeds. They were kind of prompted to engage, and then they kind of were reminded to do so. It's not so much work out of your routine, because if you're posting on Facebook to take a photo and post on the group isn't such a hard thing. The pick-off and drop-off is really close. It could be part of your routine, going to work, or it's kind of dropping off the kids or what have you. The other part of this is it's not, the fit for purpose of the platform. So Facebook groups are kind of like a kind of chronological thing. So, you might think that actually having something like more like a marketplace or Gumtree where you have things sorted by categories might be more useful, and it would probably be easier to find stuff, that's for sure. But keeping it in kind of this posting space where things just kind of scroll keeps it much more in the relationship space and the discursive space rather than the transactional space of the kind of Facebook marketplace. So it's actually important to have those kind of comments and conversations about the objects. As we can kind of see here, this post about the kind of somebody looking to help another family that has moved into the local area. And you can kind of see here these kinds of comments around you've joined the Buy Nothing family, an important part of these interactions that keep it in the kind of relationship and discursive space. One of the things that the Buy Nothing project movement in America is trying to do is move it to an app. And so they've launched this new app which effectively has that categorisation. The problems with the app is that it's kind of much more open, so it's not tied to a local community and it's not closed to a specific kind of region or particular group of people. And also it has a much more transactional feel than the relationship feel. So there's a lot of local resistance for this app. And the other thing people talked about with the app is that it wasn't easy to use. It was another thing to remember, and because of that, they weren't doing it. So everybody kind of that we talk to is staying in the Facebook groups. So there's this kind of thing that even though the platform isn't fit for purpose, it still suits their lives better, and so they're going to stay in that space. It's also part of that belonging and that kind of familiarity, that if you're kind of familiar and you feel like you belong in that space, you're going to stay there and you're going to use it, even though the system doesn't quite work for you. It doesn't quite work overall for what the activity is, I guess. Unfortunately, because of that, a lot of the international support, the kind of admin training, resources and support for new groups has gone missing, which is an area of concern in terms of admin burnout. So, key takeaways. Overall, this research shines a light on hidden economies that are making progress towards a circular economy. Group membership provides waste reduction and recirculation, environmental and wellbeing benefits for individuals and broader society, and is one route for embedding CE practices into people's everyday lives. It can be further improved through addressing participation barriers. For example, knowledge of the group will encourage more people to join, or encouraging more participation and higher up the waste hierarchy. We need to recognise and value the many motivations for driving CE behaviours, and knowing that kind of people will participate because they like free stuff. It's still sustainable, even if it's maybe not driven by sustainable values. And these kind of feed exposure, group norming and community champions for behaviour change are kind of crucial points to take forward that can be applied elsewhere. As we know, circular economy is part of a net zero strategy, and I think there's significant opportunities for local governments and council leadership in this space, particularly in the vacuum following the move to the app. Not all areas have groups. Currently, we're concentrated, the Buy Nothing project is concentrated in larger cities and towns, but not all. So, for example, Esperance in West Australia has a very active group in a town of 12,000. But setting up and promotion of these groups in smaller areas in regional Australia, I think, is a crucial activity as well. I think there's a lot more to say on this, and we're launching this report officially today here. But if you'd like to talk to me more about this, I really would love to share my findings and kind of share where we can go next together. Thank you.
How's that? Oh yeah, that's working. Wow, thanks Madeline. I love the fact that you're diving there into that whole context of needs versus wants. That's great quotes coming out from people there. Really powerful. Thanks for that. So we're going to move on now to Ryan Collins. He's the head of circular economy programs at Planet Ark, and Ryan's diving into the concept of information does not equal behaviour. Thanks, Ryan. Come on up.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Costa. I have one of my favourite memories from last year, Costa. It was at the ACE Awards / Planet Ark's 30th birthday. It was late in the evening. We're on the dance floor, and we ended up singing Bon Jovi's "Living on a Prayer." No, not "Living on a Prayer." No, actually, it was. Yeah, sorry, "Living on a Prayer." So I've just got it in my mind. We're halfway there. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to elders, past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So I'm going to have to zoom through some of these slides because there is so much good stuff to talk about. I'll be talking to you today about the trials that were run by Behaviour Works on what works to reduce recycling contamination. I'm not going to go through what Planet Ark does. Hopefully most of you are aware after Beck's keynote address this morning. So Behaviour Works, they are Australia's largest university-funded behaviour change research enterprise working out of Monaco University. And this project was run by Jenny Macklin, who is actually talking later this conference, I think on Thursday. They run a number of different projects. Waste and circular economy is just one of them. So I'd like you to keep in your mind this question as I take you through the presentation. There is a hint in there of the answer, and we'll come back to that at the end. So studies have found that having the knowledge and ability and even the intention to recycle doesn't mean that an individual actually will. It's a low involvement decision activity for the brain, and habits and inertia may actually block that change of behaviour. So that knowledge and ability within itself is not going to necessarily change behaviour without creating agency and the motivation. Sadly, there is no magic pill or silver bullet to fix them because they're complex problems. But rather we can use evidence-based practices to increase our chances of success. Behaviour change is not really about it is about increasing the odds, but it's not going to work 100% of the time with 100% of the audience. So on to the trials. So the trials had some key aims. They were to better understand why contamination happens, explore what works to improve those recycling practices, help address the problem of relying on unreliable and a lack of evidence in terms of that intuition that we sometimes communicate with, and therefore creating more impactful communications. Now, I don't want to overstate the role that Planet Ark played in these experiments. We were but a supporting partner. It was Behaviour Works that ran the experiments and the councils that implemented them. But we believe it was one of the largest programs of behaviour change ever coordinated in Australia. So Behaviour Works, they conducted a literature review, they talked to government, they talked to waste practitioners, and then where we came in was in the co-design workshops that they facilitated, and then we also supported some of the resources that were made for those council trials. So there were three streams of the experiments. One of them was to look at what works to grab and hold people's attention via Facebook. The other stream was to work out what improves people's sorting knowledge, and that was an online survey. And then there were some field trials which looked at what actually improves sorting behaviour. So firstly, I'll just talk about the field trials. Now, these field trials were involved providing feedback to residents via bin tags and postcards for single unit dwellings. And the focus was on reducing soft plastics and bag materials. This is one of the resources that was created, a priming flyer. Now, priming is when brief exposures to certain stimuli or information is provided before subsequent stimuli or calls to action, and it's one of those key principles of behaviour change. I'll talk through some of the behaviour change principles in terms of the messaging that was used. You'll see here the principle of reciprocity. So that's where I take an action, it's more likely that someone else is going to take an action as well. So the messaging there is, we're working in your street to get recycling right, we need your help. We're also showing empathy as well. So we understand that it's a complex problem and sometimes confusing. And showing empathy is also a good way to build trust with your community. Now, these resources that I'm showing you, these are the ones that worked, and this actually reduced the number of contaminant soft plastics per household by 64%, and contaminant bagged recyclables by a massive 83%. This was one of the positive bin tags that we used. So they were placed on the bins of those that were recycling right. And the reason why it was public and placed on the bin is to create that social norming aspect. So if you see, a street full with lots of bins with these tags, then that's showing that a lot of people are doing the right thing. We've got some reinforcing messaging there. Thanks for doing the right thing. We've got the specific target behaviour, so spelling out exactly what we're after. So, no soft plastics or bag recyclables, and how to recycle right. Not sure if you can read that, but there's also a efficacy or consequence message as well. And that basically just talks about the fact that by recycling you can help us produce products that are made from recyclable materials. And then we've got basically a message there about combating misunderstanding and where people can find more information. So what about the residents that may not have recycled properly? So this is the corrective postcards that were used, or one of the versions. And this feedback was given privately, so we're not showing that a lot of people are making mistakes by placing it on the bin. Also, by choosing this image, we're combating reactance. So reactance occurs when you tend to push back against a threat to your behaviour or your behavioural freedom. Here we're using the image and treating it like it's a bemusing accident rather than bad behaviour. There's an accountability message there that we've looked in your bin, and then feedback on the actual behaviour. None of those items belong in the recycling bin. Again, we're showing empathy. We know that it can be confusing at times, and then again outlining the specific target behaviour. On the back, we repeated some of the behaviour change principles, just adding in one extra one in there, loss aversion. So here we're saying don't let mistakes ruin your recycling efforts. It can also be known as loss attention because we pay more attention to loss than we do to gain. I'll quickly take you through the online flyer trials as well. Now, this happened online, and basically participants were presented with 20 items and then asked to put them in one of their curbside bins. They were then shown a flyer with information and then asked to do the same thing. So this is an example of one of the flyers. We've got the attention hook there of did you know and the information underneath. This specific flyer resulted in a decrease in contamination in terms of the online survey by 80%. But these experiments were conducted in an artificially high attention compliance environment. So obviously in the real world that may not be the same case, but it will provide some indication of the effectiveness. Overall, what was found was that focusing on no items only in the communications were what had the biggest impact on reducing contamination. So what was less effective was communications that targeted both the contamination out and then the leakage in or getting recyclables out of the general waste into the recycling bin. So if your main objective is to reduce contamination, then having a no message is most effective. Onto the Facebook trials. So some key consideration with these trials, they're not actually a strong proxy for actual behaviour change. There are a few steps before the actual behaviour, but they can provide some insights into two of the many barriers to correct recycling behaviour, and that is grabbing people's attention and motivating them to find out more. Apologies for the slightly blurriness, but I'll take you through a couple of the comparison trials that were done. This was a City of Canada Bay trial comparing a gamification message with an informational message. So gamification, as the name suggests, it's where there's a game element, such as a quiz. So we ask the question, which of these can go in your recycling bin? And that's versus the informational message of, these are the contaminants found in your recycling bin. Another trial by Blacktown City Council was comparing a bin and person smiling photo versus just a bin photo. And the person smiling photo won in terms of engagement. There's also a social norming message there that was on both of those posts. And Fairfield City Council looked at a prompting reflection message versus an instructional message. So prompting reflection is where you're directing the reader to reflect on an important aspect of the issue. So you're explicitly saying, take a moment to think about. So that message was used versus make sure you always tip these items in loose. This ended up outperforming all other messages, so it had a bigger impact, about 2.3 times more than the other strategies. So it's really a promising message to take home. However, it was only tested once and only in one council area, so it obviously needs to be repeated. We recently conducted some Facebook trials as well. The first trial, we used a video, and our objective of these ads was to get as many video plays as possible. So this is using, or kind of repeating a similar test to one of the previous ones that I just showed. So we're using imagery of a person smiling versus imagery of a bin. We've got the exact same call to action, we've got the same caption on the video and caption in the post. So what were the results? Well, a little surprisingly, the photo of the bin won out. Many more video plays and reach. So what can we conclude by this? And this is more of a hypothesis than a conclusion, but perhaps in a video, a smiling person distracts attention away from the key message, so people then lose attention. But there could be other factors involved, gender, age, the fact that it's a video versus the other experiment, which was an image. So people are taking that information in differently. Ultimately, more testing is needed. Trial 2 was just a static tile, and the objective of this was to get as much web traffic as possible to our website. Again, the same text. We've got an instructional message on one. Check the Australasian recycling label to know which which bin your packaging goes in. Versus a gamification message, would you have guessed this? And then the same images and same call to action. So the results of this, they're a little more as we would have thought. More learn, more clicks, and a much bigger reach. So we can conclude that gamification does attract attention and motivates people to learn more. So what can you do when you're designing perhaps a trial or your next communication campaign? Be very clear, unlike that probably that post there. Be very clear and targeted about what you want to achieve. Each behaviour is complex and has many steps in the chain. Getting a little better. Understand the specific issues. Bagged recyclables, there are beliefs behind it, there are ingrained habits, there's the convenience aspect. Match your approach to the main barriers, so understand those barriers. And then importantly, test for your specific audience, for your specific issue, learn and adapt, and share results. And Planet Art can help you do that. So there are resources for councils on this link on RNY, Recycling Near You. They have all the field trial resources that were developed. There's also a link to a webinar that Jenny Macklin and I did for National Recycling Week, which goes into a bit of the other aspects of the experiments. And of course, for the research reports, go to the BehaviourWorks website. What's the next frontier? I'm not going to talk through this, but as well as the need to scale up these behaviour change tests, potentially what drives a circular citizen is what the next frontier holds. This is just a snapshot of what might be taken into consideration when we're designing trials for that wider circular economy. And finally, not sure if anyone has guessed it. Sorry. I don't think Jenny actually endorsed that joke, so any complaints come to me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Ryan. I didn't get the floss, but that's all right. I liked your comment about we pay more attention to loss than to gain, and that's a really big one, because often we don't recognise, and that's one thing that Penrith did after they had massive contamination in their bins. They did a year of education, and then at the end put out a campaign, "You've got it sorted," and that was celebrating the gains. So I really like that point. Hang on a sec, what's happened here? That's it. So gamification, I'm going to say, are we going to be joined now by Amanda or Rebecca? What do you reckon? Who do you want? Well, I think that looks like C to me. So we're now going to be joined by Amanda Monaco from the City of Sydney. She's a recycling programs coordinator, and she's going to be talking about a multi-pronged approach to community recycling. So please welcome Amanda.
So I want to tell a story about an urban community where people put hazardous items like electronics and batteries in their curbside bins. A community that is transient, time poor, and don't want to travel far to have to take their disposal items somewhere. But don't worry, there is a happy ending. Hello, my name is Amanda Monaco. I'm the Recycling Programs Coordinator at the City of Sydney. Today I'll provide some context to the background of the scene, explain our community recycling options, and then provide lessons learnt on our journey. The problem we set out to solve was to address the shortage of options for City of Sydney residents to recycle tricky items or problem materials. That is, items that are not accepted in curbside services, but were still recyclable. At that stage, the options that already existed were a quarterly event for electronics only, an annual chemical clean-out event, and 10 recycling stations for mobiles and batteries and bulbs. We needed to explore and identify the characteristics of our local government area. The City of Sydney identified that any solution needed to cater to the changes in our growing population and suited our high density, our residents living in apartments, so both low and high rise, people with limited or no access to vehicles, so it needed to be attractive to both pedestrians and cyclists, and of course our transient population. To solve this problem, we conducted targeted research to better define what the needs were by further exploring the most suitable options for residents. This consisted of undertaking user experience research, applying service design thinking, and conducting a needs analysis. The research findings enabled us to define our residents' needs. It was identified that we needed to provide multiple ways to engage with our residents, so a versatile service, help them understand context, namely why it is important to do so, recycle the process, make the process feel seamless and guide them so it's easy to use, communicate consistently and clearly, and show how their effort provides value and is worthwhile, and we needed the service to be timely and convenient. The research findings also allowed us to identify our service principles. They were that our service needed to be designed to optimise recycling rates, be universally accessible, drive awareness and educate at the same time, incentivise recovery behaviours by being easy and convenient, and empower users to take control of their own recycling needs. After applying those resident needs and service principles to a long list of possible solutions, the options that we shortlisted to investigate for implementation included doubling the number of recycling stations, expanding our existing drop-off events to include more items, look at how we could site a regular drop-off location that was convenient for residents to access via walking, and investigate an option to take the service to the residents, so a mobile type of service instead of residents needing to come to us. So here are the 4 programs and the implementation timeline. First was Recycle It Saturday, then the doorstep recycling service, the enhancements we made to our recycling stations, and the most recently implemented Ultimo Recycling pop-up. As previously mentioned, prior to our improvements, we accepted only 4 streams of materials. And now we accept up to 16 materials for one of those programs. We do streamline across programs as much as possible. However, we also need to consider safety and the service itself. And now I will provide an overview of these services. The first program to be implemented was Recycle It Saturday, which was actually an extension to the already existing quarterly electronic drop-off events initiated back in 2008. Those events ran for 12 years for residents and collected just over 400 tonnes of materials and a total attendance at just under 14,000. So how did we improve this service? In September 2020, we expanded our events to become Recycle It Saturday. Events are still run quarterly, but we have an additional 12 items for drop-off. We ran 6 events for City of Sydney residents before further expanding and partnering with our neighbours, Waverley and Woollahra Council, in February 2022, who were also running their own events. Items on offer have slightly changed since inception. An example was originally accepting garden clippings. However, there was limited demand, so this is no longer offered. Some items that we have recently included, though, include coffee pods, lead-acid batteries, and small metals, all of which have proved to be popular. We also know that our promotions work as residents adhere to any changes that we make in materials accepted, such as the no longer accepting of soft plastics. So events are run on a Saturday, and residents can attend via car, walking, or riding. All attendees complete a survey where we gather information on their postcode, what they have to drop off, and if they have been to our event before. We also have a station set up at the entrance for pedestrians and those travelling on 2 wheels to save them having to enter the depot. Residents who drive proceed into the depot and stop at different stations depending on the items that they have to drop off. We also require traffic management on the day. Staff unload items for the residents and sort into designated bins or containers. This is the area that we accept all electronics, polystyrene, small metals, coffee pods, and cardboard. The resident stays in their vehicle the entire time and is then on their way. The whole experience is usually completed in less than 10 minutes. Since expanding to Recycle It Saturday, we have run 10 events and seen over 7,700 attendees. We've collected over 190 tonnes of materials, and the program accepts 16 streams, which is the largest on variety for our residents to divert. The next step of our enhancements was the doorstep recycling service, which initiated as the home recycling trial in November 2020. Through a request for quotation, Recycle Smart was awarded the contract. The home recycling trial filled a gap in our services, not just during COVID-19, but proved to be convenient for those residents who didn't want to wait for our quarterly events and don't have a car or have other items that are already not accepted in our stations. This service also didn't compete with our weekly bulky collections. As well as its convenience for residents, council also benefits as the booking system is managed by the contractor. It did result in undertaking additional RFQs, requests for quotations, to secure processing contracts, and upgrades were required to our recycling room to allow for the collected materials to be stored. So how does it work? Residents schedule their bookings online, place their items out on their doorstep or inside their apartment lobby. The contractor collects the items, returning them to the council depot for sorting. The contractor is constantly communicating with the resident, and the resident doesn't even need to be home for the collection. As the trial was deemed successful and beneficial for our residents, the program morphed into the doorstep recycling service, and council went to tender to secure a contractor. SCR Group was awarded the current contract for 3 to 5 years. Additional improvements to our service include council management over the items that are accepted, proof of those collections, and our reporting includes a weight per stream per day. Since initiating this service as a trial and our extension of the program, we've undertaken 15,000 pickups, collected 38,000 bags, and over 60 tonnes of materials, with 11 streams on offer for collection. We are confident that this will continue to be a valuable service for our residents. Moving on to our recycling stations, which we've had across the local government area since 2013. The original stations accepted 3 materials: batteries, mobiles and light bulbs. They had 3 doors for access, and each stream had 2 buckets inside to collect materials. Some stations required different keys to open them, and they were located in 10 community centres and libraries. Improvements to the stations included an additional stream of small electronics, bringing materials up to 4 types accepted. This includes cameras, webcams, e-readers and smartwatches. We've removed a door, so we've got 2 doors, so there's no jamming middle door. We've increased the height to allow for an additional bucket inside the station, so we now have 3 buckets per stream. All stations can be accessed by the 1 key. They're also smart stations, so they contain sensors to notify us when the stations require collection and also if they're getting too hot. We've included a fireproof lining to increase damage control if there is a fire in the stations, which adheres to advice from B-Cycle. The stations are also made from metal, so future recycling of the station is available if required at end of life. Oh, thank you. In addition, we will be further improving the stations early next financial year for accessibility. This will include braille and tactile lettering, as well as adding contrasting colours to the top so the visibility of the slots are improved. Now, we did have good coverage with the original stations, but you can see there are some gaps. It was agreed that 750 metres was the maximum distance people would walk to want to get to a station, which is about 10 minutes. This is represented by the orange radius points on the map. When searching for new sites, there were a few things that we wanted to consider, including installation inside a council-owned asset, so they're monitored and managed by staff and located out of the elements, and this too helps with customer and resident interaction. After a thorough search, 6 new sites now have a recycling station, and this is represented by the additional green points on the map. These provide a much broader coverage of the local government area, with over 80% of our residents living within a 750 metre radius of a station. We have, however, exhausted our current options for what we would deem a suitable site. There are plans, however, for new community centres that will provide additional options in the future for those 4 remaining stations. So from August 2022, when the new stations were implemented, we've collected over 700 kilos of batteries, 180 kilos of mobiles, 200 kilos of light bulbs, and almost 400 kilos of small electronics. This is a total of 1.5 tonnes. The Ultimo Recycling Pop-Up is the newest of our programs to be implemented. It's a walk-up to drop-off model located in a designated room in our Bay Street depot with access directly from the street for residents. We were fortunate as the location was previously used for storage, so no new facility needed to be built. This was perfect as we were now able to test this model using this previously underutilised space. It did, however, require some renovation and repairs to safely meet the needs of the service. This included removing fencing and all items inside the space, installing a wall, pressure washing everything, painting, lifting lights, filling in trip hazards, installing pallet racking, and organising locks and remotes for access. The pop-up began in late November last year and is currently open Tuesdays 2 till 7 p.m, with the exception of public holidays. It's accessible only for City of Sydney residents, with non-residents being turned away. As the pop-up is promoted as a walk-up to drop-off, public transport, riding and walking are the best options for the location due to limited parking as the area is quite built up. Residents should be able to carry their items safely, so small items are encouraged. And we don't accept hazardous commercial construction or other building materials. The drop-off process starts with residents lining up and completing a short survey via QR code. Attendees complete fields such as their address so that we can confirm they are a resident, the items they have to recycle, and how they travel to the pop-up. For residents without a phone or having access issues, staff at the pop-up can assist by using their own phones or iPads if needed. The completed survey data is then available on an iPad for staff to confirm the residents' details and items they have. Anything not accepted is then given back to the resident to take home. Staff weigh the items during this process, and residents chat with staff and have a positive experience while they are there. The resident can then be on their way. After weighing the total items from the resident, this number is added to the survey to provide us with a weight per visit and completes the survey for that drop-off. Items are then sorted into corresponding bins, and the whole experience can take about 5 minutes or less. As this was a completely new concept and service for our residents, we started with an initial phase of a soft launch, and that included signage at the location, website updates, and internal communications. The second phase included photography, a letterbox drop within a 500-metre radius of the location, news stories, posters, details in existing newsletters, and face-to-face outreach in the neighbourhood. The third and most recent phase has included organic social reels, always-on social ads, and an outdoor digital screen located right on Bay Street itself near the pop-up. And since launching 5 months ago, we've had 21 pop-ups with 616 visits. We've collected 5.1 tonnes and are currently accepting 13 streams. This is a screenshot of our pop-up dashboard that updates from staff iPads in real time. You can see from the heat map where residents are travelling from, with the star indicating where the pop-up is located. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that electronics is the most common item dropped off at the moment. So we also discovered on our first open day that we were actually interacting a lot with residents walking past, so we created another survey to capture this data. So in addition to the 616 visits, people who brought items to recycle, we've had 205 residents walking past just inquiring about the pop-up itself. The data here also shows that 362 residents have walked to the location, which represents 58% of attendees. And at the bottom there, you can see the most recent spike in attendance, which corresponds with our social media from the third phase that I just mentioned. So here is some positive feedback from our residents on 3 of the programs, Recycle It Saturday Doorstep program and the Ultima Recycling Pop-Up. And you can see that residents are finding our programs convenient, organised, and a fantastic idea. So what's next? We're now looking to continue to add more streams with the exception of the stations, and this includes trying to streamline across those programs to create as much cohesion as we can. Of course, this includes adding soft plastics when available for us. We're continuing to review these programs and make tweaks for improvements along the way where required. And as the pop-up is still quite new, we're ramping up communications to get a higher attendance, which may lead to further expansions of the pop-up. So some things learnt along the way, particularly for me. The research was required as a driver for the solutions and to support the business case for these programs. And it seems obvious, but creating a program plan or a Gantt chart was essential to keeping some of these projects mostly on track, and it was made clear what was needed to be done. Staff within the immediate team were the drivers in these projects. Yes, we already had council buy-in, but we had to advocate for these programs when working with other stakeholders. Regarding the recycling station upgrades, consulting with accessibility guidelines or experts in that field in the early stages so that those can be included in specs for new designs for stations. And my own personal lesson to myself, try not to be a perfectionist, just start. You can make tweaks along the way, and no matter how organised you are, there's always delays in execution or something unexpected to come up. And there is, after all, no such thing as perfect. So as you can see, with the right tailored and localised services and engagement, that community that I mentioned at the beginning has found a way to recycle their tricky items. Thank you so much. My details are on the screen, and I look forward to chatting with you over the coming days.
Thanks, Amanda. Wow, the data, so important, like weighing and collating and the visits and the walk by. So much information there, so much for everyone to consider. Without that data, as you say, you don't have anything. It's kind of, oh yeah, it's working, it's kind of good, we've moved a whole lot of stuff. God, you had it all down there. That's really wonderful to listen to, so thank you so much. And our final our speaker before we have a short Q&A before lunch is Rebecca Everett. She's the Sustainability Manager for Cleanaway in New South Wales and ACT, and she's going to talk to us about insights and trends from Cleanaway's third Recycling Behaviours Report. So please welcome Rebecca. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks, Costa. So yes, my name is Rebecca. I am the New South Wales ACT Sustainability Manager for Cleanaway. A lot of what our team do, though, is education, hence me being here today. I'd like to echo the previous speakers in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on today, the Gumbanya people, apologies if I mispronounced that, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and acknowledge their connection to land, sea, sky and community. This is just a little one. I'm pretty sure everybody here would know who Cleanaway are. We're a large waste management provider, Australian waste management provider. We have a lot of staff, obviously, and a lot of those are actually education officers. We've got over 40 educators nationally. So we're very, very invested in education programs. What I'm talking about today is our Recycling Behaviours Report. Now, this is actually the third year that we've run this report. The reason we do it is to inform all of our education programs and work out how we can better help people to recycle right and also help our customers as well. I think a lot of the time we make assumptions about why people do things. I think there's been really good information today about, looking into some of those different behaviours, but this research that we do is a national program. We've done it 3 years in a row, as I mentioned, so we've sort of got some patterns and trends and things that are emerging. We do it in conjunction with the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. They are a specialty investment provider that have a mission of helping Australia deliver a low emissions future, so it was a really good partnership opportunity for us. There we go. So the way we did the research was an online survey. It's 1,000 Australians. We specifically had the breakdown to be as representative of the population as possible in terms of age, gender, different states, and also metro and regional within those states to try and get a really good understanding of what's going on and which people are thinking what. The data is collected in February every year. Survey takes about 20 minutes to get through. The answers obviously are self-reported, but we do a sort of sorting activity where we have a really good effort to try and test people on their own assumptions about what's correct and what's incorrect. We do have a lot of questions that are the same every year, but we have a few that are tailored as well. So in 2022, for example, we asked questions about the pandemic and how that was impacting people's behaviour. And then this year we've been talking about cost of living. So I'm just going to go through some of the results at quite a high level. It's a pretty in-depth report. If you're interested, I highly recommend having a look. The report and all of the data are on our website for the past 3 years' worth of reports. So if you want to do a deep dive into your particular state or a particular age group, you can do that because you've got access to the data. So similar to last year, but a little bit of an increase from when we first started in 2021, Australians think that they're really good at recycling. So 78% of people, more than 3/4, rate themselves as good or very good recyclers. Unfortunately, some of the answers to some of the other questions actually tell a bit of a different story. So you can see there that 34% of Australians don't empty or rinse their containers. 38% don't separate the different components, so they might not take a metal lid off a glass jar. And 37% don't check for the recycling symbols or the ARL. And the amount of people checking for that ARL has actually gone down since 2022, which is a little bit of a shame. In the sorting task, like I mentioned, we asked people, we gave them a whole lot of different examples of items and asked them what they would do with them. So we had options of, putting them into some of their curbside bins or taking them to specialist recycling. Despite good intentions, there was still a lot of people getting common items wrong. One that really made me angry was 53% of people still putting coffee cups in their recycling bins. Even with all of the information that's out there, that behaviour change still isn't happening, even though people might know the right thing to do. 32% incorrectly put soft plastics into their recycling bin. It's worth mentioning as well that this year's report showed a really significant decline in people taking soft plastics to specialised recycling because of what's happened with REDcycle, so that's sort of been something that's impacted the results this time. 24% of people are putting batteries into their curbside bins, which is very problematic for all of us, and 38% of people aren't taking mobile phones for specialist disposal. I just wanted to touch on the batteries piece because it's such a hot topic at the moment for all of us in the industry, and particularly for companies like us that process materials. Batteries, as we know, have a lot of recyclable materials in them. They contain some toxic materials though, so they shouldn't be mixed with other household products in the recycling bin or into the garbage bin like chemicals. They're explosive and they can cause fires, but a quarter of people are still putting them in their curbside bins. And 13% of those are putting them in their recycling bins. So depending on which bin they think it should go in, but it's a real problem. So it suggests that either people are unaware of the damage that these items can cause, or they're having trouble getting them to where they need to be going, so they're just taking the path of least resistance. So some of the barriers to recycling, we might go through some of the negative stuff first. Unfortunately, despite everybody's best efforts, confusion around recycling is increasing. So it's gone up by 4% to 38% this year. So over a third of participants are still confused about what can go in their recycling bins. The proportion of people who say it's hard to find instructions has also increased from 38 to 44%. A lot of the comments that we had were talking about a need for national consistency so that they can be clear about what's going on, and really needing to have clear instructions about what to do with all of their household items. Some of the other barriers that people talked about are lack of appropriate recycling infrastructure. It's quite interesting because a little bit later I'll talk about the motivations for people in why they recycle, and the motivations are normally sort of more moral in terms of it's the right thing to do, whereas the barriers are quite often logistical, so having access to the right recycling services or the right bins. A lot of what people were saying was that they would recycle more and they would recycle better if their home recycling services were improved. Things like they would like a larger recycling bin. 46% of people said they'd like a bigger bin. 33% of people said if they had access to home recycling bins for specific materials, they would recycle more. And 48% said that it's hard to get everything that should be recycled to the right place for recycling, which is why Amanda's fantastic program is so good in City of Sydney, that giving people easy access to recycle all of those difficult things will hopefully show that less people will be putting them into their bins at home. The other one, which was really disappointing, is that the trust in the recycling system is declining. Kate touched on this morning. So 43% of Australians actually don't trust that their recycling will be recycled, which is up from 36%. And the proportion of those who think, why bother, it all goes to landfill anyway, has also gone up from 15% to 20%. So despite all of these fantastic programs, that trust piece is still a real issue. Some of the reasons that people gave for why they don't trust in the recycling system anymore are that they think that it's all contaminated anyway, so why bother? Particularly those that lived in apartment buildings would say things like this. If they're seeing that other people are doing the wrong thing, why should I bother to do the right thing? High profile recycling, or not scandals, but incidents like the collapse of REDcycle, for example. People were taking all of their things to be recycled at Coles and Woolies, and then to find out that they were being stockpiled and it hasn't actually happened, it feels like a bit of a betrayal for people. Also, lack of visibility on the recycling processes. So not understanding what happens behind closed doors or once that truck takes away the contents of their bins. So people would like to be able to have a little bit more assurance that the right thing is happening. As I mentioned, the motivations for recycling are a little bit different. So the majority of people recycle because it's the right thing to do. So it's very heartening that, you know, we can still talk about that. Other key reasons given were to minimise waste going to landfill and to help the environment. As I mentioned, we talk about some different things each year. So 2022, we talked about the pandemic. This year, we talked about cost of living. It was absolutely the runaway major concern for people this year. So 84% of people placed cost of living in their top two, closely followed by housing affordability at 47%. They actually put it higher than climate change, which came in third at 30%, and food and packaging waste only had 18% of people placing it in their top two priorities. So it just really is not necessarily something that's on our everyday Australian or our residents' mind at the moment. Cost of living is just taking up a lot of their processing space. Almost all respondents, so 84% placed it in their top two, but 97% of people reported having been at least slightly affected by cost of living. So we really have to keep that context in mind when we're talking to people about, you know, doing the right thing and more sustainable behaviours, that really that's not what they're thinking about day to day. They're thinking about how they can reduce their cost of living. Now, there have been some positive impacts of this, which is really fantastic. So tying in with what Madeline was talking about this morning, or a little bit earlier, we have had a really big increase in people who are engaging in sustainable behaviours like repairing before replacing, buying less, buying second-hand, looking after items to take them to the end of their life before getting a replacement. Mostly people are motivated to do these activities because it saves them money, not necessarily because it's better for the environment, but we've got to take the wins where we can get them, right? So if it's meaning that we're getting, you know, an uptick in this sort of behaviour, the main thing will be keeping that momentum going once cost of living eases, and making sure that people maintain those behaviours into the future. There were a couple of negative ones as well, with a few more people buying cheaper items or buying less sustainably produced items instead of items that might cost more, even though they knew that buying the more expensive, more sustainable item was the right thing to do. Interestingly, the majority of people who are doing these behaviours, actually a whole lot of them, I think it was 40-something%, actually started these behaviours last year in 2022. So there's lots of people that are new to reuse and repairing and all of those fantastic things, so it's great to encourage them along their journey. So just touching on that a little bit further, in previous surveys, we've actually had recycling being ranked really highly in terms of what people think are the right thing to do. This year we've had a bit of a shift in that recycling's dropped down and things like avoiding buying single-use items have come up. So it sort of shows that it's coming through to people, the order in which we should be looking at things and thinking about things, and that recycling, while it's still great, is something that we should consider further down after we've already considered avoiding and reusing and reducing and repairing. We also talked over the last few years a little bit about circular economy. It's a really familiar concept for all of us, right? You know, I'm sure we all dream about it. But consistently across all 3 years, very few Australians actually are familiar with the term. So 42% say they've heard of it, so less than half have heard of it, and only 22% of people have any idea what it means. So they're really not comfortable with that. But when we provide them with a definition of circular economy, 99% of people agree that it's at least slightly important. And 80% said that it was very or extremely important. And I think that this is really fantastic because it shows that the willing's there. It's just maybe that we're not talking to people in the right language. If we're talking to them about circular and circular economy, they're like, what does that mean? You know, maybe we need to talk to them more in terms of what they can do. And when we actually started, you know, asking people about, you know, how do we achieve the circular economy, what sorts of things can we do, they sort of see two different priorities that came out quite strongly. So building the infrastructure required and delivering education about how to do it. So we're all in the right industry, we're all in the right room. This is what people need. It's just working out how to do it and speak to them in the right way that they can understand what we're talking about, and we can translate all of that into people's own language. There was also a little bit of conversation, which was great in the report, or a few comments that were made about the design and manufacturing of products and making sure that they're built to be circular. So I think that shows really positive outlook as well. And I think that there's a lot that we can work with there. So I might leave it there. As I mentioned, all three reports, all of the data are all available on our website. This one just dropped last week, so all of the data is nice and fresh. If you've got any questions about the reports or anything, I'm more than happy to have a chat at lunch or any of those things. But I highly recommend that you have a look because, like I said, you can break it down, to look at your state and to look at how people are responding or a particular age group, which I think is really helpful when we're looking at targeting our programs to different people. Thanks. Oh, sure.
Thanks. Oh, thanks, Rebecca. That was great, and again, fantastic data for us to look at. And no surprise that trust in recycling has declined with what's been going on. So it really is a great opportunity for all of us to look at solutions to, as you said, the language. It's really important. We sometimes live in our bubble. I will just call everyone on. So Madeline and Ryan and Amanda, if you want to come join us, and it's time for Q&A. So does anyone have a question for our speakers? If our speakers we've got some roving mics, fantastic.
Good morning. It's Amanda Free from Hornsby Council. Thank you so much for the presentations. My question's for Amanda. What you're doing sounds really encouraging and exciting. I saw in your presentation, or I think I did, a picture of a vape. Are you collecting them? What are you doing with them? Give me any information you can, please.
I think that's an important question, and we are collecting vapes. Our current processor who takes our electronics is taking them, but they have given us assurance, they've explained that there are obviously issues with taking them. So we're continuing to take them because they're accepting them, but we are quite aware of the fact that it is tricky, and it is a tricky item. So we're taking them at the moment.
Can I ask a second question?
Is that allowed?
Maybe I'll chat with you later on, but
okay.
I'm also interested, where are you collecting them, or is there a drop-off at Bay Road? Or?
Yeah. So we're taking them at Recycle It Saturday, so the drop-off event. We're taking them at the Ultimo pop-up recycling centre and our doorstep service as well. So all of the three programs, just not the recycle. Well, we do get them in our recycling stations, but we don't it's more electronic, so people are considering that to be an electronic, so they are dropping them off in with the small electronics at the moment. Yeah, and we're separating them out when they come back. At the depot, when they come back to our locations, they do get separated, so they're separate to other items, which is more helpful, I think, yeah.
Yeah, more afternoon, I should say. Joe Jerusalem, Noosa Council. My question's to Amanda as well. I noticed in your presentation you mentioned business case. For all of the services, the additional services that you're delivering, what are the benefits as regard to the returns on that as far as the business case? So what are the costs versus the returns that you're getting out of that from a financial perspective, but also from a landfill diversion perspective?
So I don't have the data on the costs. I guess we're quite lucky that we have funding for some of these programs. So I don't have the data on that kind of return on investment, if you want to put it that way. I have all the tonnages on the screen, but it's only showing those programs and not kind of all the data that we collected from the stations before. That's kind of all separate. Plus, it's always in our green reports that the City of Sydney produces as well. So we do capture all of that data. Yeah.
Thanks. Amanda Kane for EPA. My question's for Rebecca. Did you ask any FOGO questions in your report?
We asked a few, but it was more around the services that people had. So when we were talking about, when I mentioned about the infrastructure and people who had more bins were happier, it was sort of talking about the green bins that were available there. But we didn't specifically ask many questions about FOGO in this one.
Yeah, because we've had some research that shows that people with a FOGO service use the yellow bin better as well too, and that we might be able to crunch some numbers actually out from your report.
Yeah, that sounds
whether
fantastic.
That's true. Yeah,
There's an online question here. Do you get any illegally dumped, this is for Amanda, do you get any illegally dumped items outside the depot on days that aren't Recycle It Saturdays by residents?
So for Recycle It Saturday, we don't usually get dumped items outside. We do a lot of promotion, so I think residents are quite familiar that it is a quarterly event and they know the times that it's open and things like that. So we don't get dumping there. And the pop-up, it might have been more focused on the pop-up, that question, at Ultimo. We've only been open for the 5 months, and I think in that time we've maybe had two set times where we've had stuff left out the front. But because it is pretty much a 24-hour depot, our guys have been informed to just kind of grab those items and bring them inside for us straight away, so it doesn't sit there and accumulate and that kind of thing. So it does happen, but it's not really a problem for us at the moment.
Emma Thompson, Scenic Rim Regional Council in Queensland, and this one's for Madeline. It's double-barrelled, sorry.
Yep.
Any information on amounts of material diverted or that we're getting extra value through the groups? And secondly, just wondering if there's any information on items that are rehomed but potentially not used. You touched on materials circulating through the groups, so just interested if you've got any information on that too.
Yeah, look, I can't give you tonnage or any kind of useful, kind of quantify. I can talk to you about the kind of number of posts, but that could be from 3 coat hangers to an entire couch set. So the kind of the tonnage stuff that I can't really talk to. But yeah, I can definitely give you kind of post activity that can maybe kind of before we do some averaging kind of stuff from that. In terms of the kind of what people taking, people might gift something and you go, oh, that looks nice, and then you take it and then do you actually use it? Look, I think that is a potential concern, but there is commentary and conversation in the group saying we took this and we didn't use it. So generally, I kind of think that if people do that, they put it back into the group. If they kind of haven't used it for a few months, and they'll circulate it back in, and then somebody else will take it. So I do think there is, we all have so much stuff in our house that we use kind of once a year, or never use and kind of find it in the back of a cupboard 5 years later when you move. So there is definitely a risk of that, but I think people who are in the group are kind of turned on to that, that if they're not using something, that it should be rehomed.
Just a little thing to add to that. I do a lot with repair cafes, and they're doing a really good job of collecting the data of how many items have been repaired. Where possible, they talk about tonnes, weights of things, but particularly items. So again, they've got all that data to use and validate and build partnerships elsewhere. So that's a really exciting part. Same with crop swaps. People record what's come in and what's exchanged and what's gone out. So it just takes away that, that happy clappy and really puts it down into the data phase where you step up and leverage with all the good work. So question here.
Lee Smith from Veolia. Boy, I'm glad I chose this session. That was 4 fantastic presentations. I've got a question for Madeline. In your research, or do you have a gut feeling for what percentage of people in any given community would be likely to use an app as their source of information for recycling and waste management information?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I can talk with expertise on that. I think when we took kind of across the interviews, people we interviewed, like the general consensus was like a few people have downloaded the app, barely anybody had used the app for this activity, and the people we were generally interviewing, we tried to kind of, with the interviews, make sure we were talking to people who kind of lurked on the group, as well as like kind of people who used it monthly or daily, or so we kind of had to try and have a spread. And the people who were even kind of maybe daily or weekly users of the group hadn't used the app. So I think there's a kind of a real, kind of gap there in terms of kind of behaviours that are easy and part of the day-to-day, and behaviours that are kind of seen as outside of the general remit. So I do, but the information, like I guess this is the difference between the app for this particular group is about kind of an activity versus an informational thing. So I guess the thing that I think about is interesting about the group is it kind of combines the activity and the information, because there's this really educative stance that people within the group take ownership of. But if you're kind of actually setting up an app for education, that might kind of attract a different audience. Does that make sense? Yeah, hopefully.
Hi guys, this is probably one for Rebecca and Ryan. Rebecca, in your report you mentioned...
Sorry.
Rebecca first, Ryan, part two perhaps. Rebecca, in your report you mentioned that there's some scandals that have undermined confidence in recycling industries in Australia and the percentage of waste recycled that is actually being recycled. I was wondering if you could provide some commentary as to how justified or unjustified that is, and whether that is in fact out of date. And then perhaps with Ryan, provide some points that we could use to push back against that attitude, and communicate and engage people in that recycling program again.
I think it's really difficult. I mean, people have a perception about our industry, but I mean, you look at the 600 people that are here whose job is to make sure that everything gets recycled, that we say is getting recycled. So I think that it's maybe a lack of transparency and a lack of visibility that is contributing to that. So, I love the idea of when we can open our doors, and a lot of councils do it really well, open their doors to people so that they can come in and have a look. I mean, I know when we run tours of our facilities, you have these people saying, wow, I really understand it now. Now that I've been to the MRF and now that I've seen the recycling, all of a sudden I get why I can't put plastic bags in there. And it's just having that sort of direct line in. So I think that is going to be probably a really good way forward. And we've got really fantastic, as Ryan went through, a whole lot of really good ways that we can be getting this information out there, looking at, using digital media to show people, hey, look, this is what happens, or taking people on the journey and showing them what happens. The truck doesn't just collect the bin and then that's where it stops. It's not where the journey ends for that material. So I think it's a lot of people's perceptions, and they don't understand the effort that's going in. But I think there's also, some historical things that have happened. China Sword, I think, really rocked everybody a little bit. All of a sudden, things that they thought were being recycled can't be anymore, and the same, like I mentioned, with RedCycle. So there's some work to do in building that back up again.
A few years ago, I actually did a presentation at the Coffs Conference on trust in recycling, and that was around the China Sword era. And part of what I was talking about was using the 3 C's of building trust. So that means character. So when you're communicating, you've got to show authenticity into how you're communicating. Caring, and that's that empathy. If you're showing empathy, you're showing that things are confusing, you understand that, then you're showing empathy with the audience, with the residents. And then the other one is caring, competence, and character. So competence is about showing that you're knowledgeable, and whilst information doesn't necessarily change behaviour on its own, it is critical to building trust and behaviour change as well.
Angus Johnston, Jackson Environment and Planning. I really took to the cost of living question that you got there, and some people are calling it a crisis, so never waste a crisis. Reuse, repair, it still feels very not part of our society like recycling is, you know. So I open question to the panel, how do we take advantage of this crisis to bring reuse, repair, move up the hierarchy, get it away from being fringe to being as mainstream as recycling?
I'll start because I've got the mic. I think it's storytelling. That's part of it. But you know, some of the data that Rebecca was showing there, you know, shows that movement is happening, and I think it's about tapping into the values that people have of why they're now looking at reuse. It might be to reduce their expenditure, but if you're adding to that you know, their environmental benefits, then that, you know, adds to that good feel-good kind of emotion, which will hopefully, you know, continue on. Yeah, so that would be my comment.
That's a great question. I think just from kind of the stuff that people were talking about in when we interviewed them, I think recognising that, yeah, you know, that kind of reuse and repair are valid, you know, sustainable behaviours, whether they're financially motivated or because, you know, you want to change, you know, you're kind of you know, save the planet or whatever. So I think kind of like recognising and valuing those multiple motivations, and that everybody's kind of motivations for their behaviours are driven by lots of different reasons, I think is crucial. I also think there's a piece of work to do around this idea of which is kind of tied to this reuse and repair around the shame of secondhand, or kind of asking for help. I think there's a kind of trusting to be able to lean on your community, and that's a kind of an important thing, that equally giving and receiving is kind of a part of being a part of a healthy community. I think there's kind of some really interesting work to be done in that, and, you know, kind of our late capitalist society doesn't encourage, you know, that attitude, so kind of shifting that, because as, you know, Rebecca was talking about, you know, in the keynote, like that is, you know, people are doing that, you know, doing all those behaviours, even in this kind of capitalist world we live in. So yeah,
what they said.
I mean, my programs are all about recycling, so, and my team work on that, but we do have a team at the City of Sydney, the waste avoidance team, and they do a lot of outreach and speak to residents and show them ways to reuse, and they do textile repair, clothing swaps and things like that. So I think it might just be just in tandem with everything that we're already doing and just kind of implementing it that way.
Yeah, I'll just finish off with a few little points. Like, I mean, I was driving along the other day, and, you know, I'm always scanning the roadside for stuff, and I always do live broadcasts, and sometime I'm driving, you know, a more frustrated narrative, but then find something and get people involved. Other times it's a positive narrative, like, look at this, and I just found a perfectly good compost bin, opened the lid, and there was the turner in there as well. And the framework to stop vermin underneath. And I'm like, okay, that's a good story to tell. I would have gone into the house and said, hey, I'll show you how to use this, except it was a block of units, so I didn't know whose it was. But I've got that, and I'll make a story of it. I went to the Logie Awards. I got my suit from an op shop on the way there from the airport. And then I had a couple of options, and I did a live broadcast, and there was like 10,000 people watching. The op shop said that the activity that they got in the month after that was just massive. So, you know, that being not, you know, we can influence those in our circles, and I can influence those in my bigger circle just with an action like that. And then I think about like schools, their story, doing Food Scrap Friday and sharing that with other schools that they replicate it. Crop Swap is going gangbusters. Repair Cafes, Grow It Local is a great online community that taps into all of this. Community Gardens Australia, Begans, Botanic Gardens Australia and New Zealand, Seed Savers. These are values that are being underpinned in this identity change that I talked about at the beginning. And it's happening at that youth stage as well. And when I say youth, I'm talking anywhere from 15 to 40. Like that, this is a group that are voting on these values, and they're making change and they're living change. So yeah, I think the smallest of shares, the talking about it, sharing it is really valuable because it's getting traction. So we've reached, yeah. 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 Yeah, like seeing a benchtop caddy in a soapy, and saying you should have that on Home and Away and whatever else. Like you mightn't watch it, but there's a lot of people with a lot of eyes on those things. So, wow, what a fantastic panel it's been. There's just so much information. I second your comment there about what a great mix of layers in this process. And like I said, there's no silver bullet in all of this, and here we have so many centuries out there making markers and setting up options. And just to each and every one of you, thanks for sort of really thorough conversation and information and data that we can all take away and really work. So can you please put your hands together, starting up there, Madeline Taylor, Rebecca Everett, Ryan Collins, and Amanda Monaco.